All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much to those that were here for Jorge's and have returned, and for those of you newcomers, welcome. We're so excited to hear a wonderful keynote from Dalton Henry this evening. And so as a little bit of an introduction, my name is Taylor Fry, and I am the current president of Student Alumni Board.
And my name is Sierra Lakey, and I'm currently serving as the Vice President of Campus Programming for SAB.
And on behalf of Student Alumni Board, we'd like to officially welcome you to the 5th Annual Distinguished Young Alumni Program. Before we begin tonight's presentation, there are a few wonderful people that we would like to thank for their support of DYA. First of all, we'd like to thank the K-State Alumni Association and the Board of Directors for their continual support and help for Distinguished Young Alumni, along with the Student Alumni Board programming. We'd also like to thank President and CEO of the Alumni Association, Amy Button-Rins, for all of her efforts, along with President Richard Myers and Dean of Student Life, Dr. Pat Bosco. With that, we are so excited that you're all here, and we are excited to continue another year of Distinguished Young Alumni.
And for those of you that are unfamiliar with Student Alumni Board, SAB consists of about 40 students that serve the university by representing a physical link between the Alumni Association and past, present, and future K-Staters. With among the past 8 months, SAB members have been working behind the scenes for the Distinguished Young Alumni Program in order to help connect current students with some of the most passionate and most accomplished K-State graduates that are under the age of 35. This year, we are excited to introduce to you our Distinguished Young Alumni Award recipients, and again, we're repeating this from earlier, but just a round of applause for them again, the 2017 honorees, Mr. Jorge Mendoza and Mr. Dalton Henry. At this time, I have the privilege to welcome our second Distinguished Young Alumni Award recipient to the stage. As a native of Randolph, Kansas, he is currently working as the legislative director for Congressman Roger Marshall in Washington, D.C. Previously, he was the director of policy for the U.S. Wheat Associates in Washington, D.C. as well. While at K-State, he was a member of the Alpha Gamma Rho fraternity, Blue Key Honor Society, College of Agriculture Ambassadors, the Ag Communicators of Tomorrow, and the Ag Economics Club. He also served as the student body president during the 2009-2010 school year. Please join me in welcoming Dalton Henry.
Well, thank you so much, Taylor and Sierra, for the introduction, and take a moment to thank everyone that came here this evening to see Jorge and I and kind of relive our campus days and time. So before I jump in, could we have all the SAB members stand up real quick? And folks, I'd like you to give these young students a round of applause. And they're kind of spread out throughout the room. Really, I think SAB is a tremendous program. It's not one that I actually had an opportunity to be a part of while I was at K-State, but it's been a tremendous honor and privilege to get to know these young students. I also especially need to thank them because they walked me from every appointment the last 2 days, and they have eaten breakfast, lunch, and dinner with me also for the last 2 days. So I thank them for that. And my wife is just not thrilled about the fact that I will put on my second freshman 15 by the time I get back to DC because of your hospitality. But truly, I do appreciate it, and a great thanks. Tonight, you'll notice one thing I don't have behind me is slides. And I think Jorge set us up perfectly because he had pictures of sloths in a tremendous research project. And I don't have any pictures of fuzzy animals that I ever had the opportunity of working with, at least in my current job. So, and it really goes back to when my parents, who are down here in the front row, I want to recognize them, Terry and Tammy Henry, when they got the invitation to come, she said, my mom calls and says, because I'm still young enough that I call my mom on a regular basis, and you all should too. Go home tonight and do it. She'll love you for it. She says, my gosh, Dalton, did you know that you have 35 minutes for a keynote? What are you going to talk about? Mom, I like speak for a living, It's just that nobody there is going to want to hear about Chinese wheat subsidies or the intricacies of wheat trade agreements around the world. So the good news for you all is that Marcus, who runs this program at the Alumni Association, gave me a very narrow topic about my current job and how my K-State experience prepared me for that. So we'll leave the wheat and trade stuff for the classrooms that I forced to walk with me on that journey earlier today. And so my job today, this is an interesting time in my life to be asked to come and talk about it because I'm all of about 7 weeks in. All right, so it's brand new to me. I'm still in that learning phase. Really, after I had just finally gotten done with 7 years in the wheat industry and felt like I had a good handle on that. So I think tonight you'll probably hear me talk about the couple of careers that I've had and kind of walk through maybe what a few of those experiences have been like, and especially how my K-State experience prepared me to be hopefully successful in those. But today I work for Congressman Roger Marshall as his legislative director. For those of you that haven't ever made a Hill visit before or visited Washington, D.C., a congressional office on the House side is very small. There are 7 of us in that office. So we cover a lot of ground. And essentially my role is to do the research, take the meetings, answer the phone calls, answer the emails, sit through committee meetings. I was here last week on campus for the Senate's Farm Bill field hearing, dig down into the policy weeds, and work to match those topics up with my boss's priorities and with the priorities of the 1st District of Kansas. It's the largest agricultural district in the country, and I'm an agricultural policy nerd. And so it's been a beautiful fit so far. The work is intense, it's long hours, but it's also a lot of fun. And so for that, I'm tremendously thankful. As I think about my K-State experience and how much fun it's been to be back on campus this week, you know, one word that we always hear and that we talk about constantly is the K-State family. And I think that, we see it in signs in the football stadium, we see it on blocks in the Ag Student Services rooms. At the same time, that's probably a word that means a little something different to a lot of folks. Or when we talk about the K-State family, it's something that can be just a little bit different to each person. In my mind, when we think about who a family is and what a family does, a family is a group of people that goes out of their way to make sure you're successful, just because they're your family. And as I think about my experience at K-State, that's what I had continuously. So I was a shy kid from Randolph, Kansas. I came to K-State wearing Wrangler jeans and boots. I lived in the residence halls because my mother insisted that I would do it and I would make new friends. I owe her an awful lot, but as I think about finding my place in a university where that residence hall had more folks in my hometown in it, I can point back to a couple of experiences that I think really made that. And you'll have to forgive me tonight because I've only got 35 minutes, so that's going to be a limited set of experiences. And as I look around the room, there's a lot of people that had a big impact on my life here today. And so when we would do, one of my jobs at K-State was we recruited students to the College of Agriculture. And so we were in Waters 119, and that was we did prospective student visits. And our typical model for that was we'd always talk to students about 3 different areas. I know there's a couple of ag ambassadors in the room, and so hopefully this starts to sound familiar. But we talk about finding success in the classroom. Dr. Boggs, you'll be proud I put classroom first. Dr. Boggs was my associate dean in the College of Ag and continuously worried about my focus on the classroom. We talk about finding success and finding your place in student organizations and campus involvement. And finally, we talk about getting some work experience and having a meaningful work experience prior to graduation. Because at the end of the day, that college degree is preparing you for a job. And so to start out, I had unique experiences in each of those fields where someone took a personal interest in me, not because it was their job, not because they had to, but just because they chose to. And in the classroom, it's a pretty clear experience for me. I wasn't exactly the student that loved going to class. I always went when I could. But I never knew what I wanted to major in. So I was the kid that raised that average up as to the number of times that somebody changes their major. So I was a late addition to the Agricultural Communications and Journalism program. That's the degree that I graduated in. And I was a bit of a procrastinator at times. And so I was coming up on my senior year, and I had yet to take college algebra or general chemistry. And I had to pick up another freshman level or introductory level general ag course. And so the one I needed was Intro to Food Science, because ag com's a little broader degree than ag econ, so you got to take more general classes. And so I'm looking at the potential of being a senior, or rather a fifth-year senior at K-State, with half, actually 2/3 of my course load, freshman level courses. It's actually not a bad way to plan it, had I thought about doing that. And so I sat down with my advisor, and I think he was kind of looking at this with me and thought, gosh, there's got to be a way that we can actually make this a meaningful experience for you, Dalton, and actually challenge you in the classroom a little bit. Algebra was plenty challenging for me. That's why I was a fifth-year senior and hadn't taken it yet. And he sat down and says, we could pick something else out that deals with food safety. That way you could pass on the Intro to Food Science and get you out of at least one of those freshman classes. And we'd just variance it in. On your transcript, it's just going to say Food Science 101 or 102. But you're probably going to do a lot more work than that. And he ended up connecting me with Dr. Justin Kastner, who taught a class in DMP. That's like something that's cool. Diagnostic and medical pathobiology, right? Not a science major. General chemistry as a senior. And it was ag and trade health. And it is the hardest class I could have ever imagined taking. And I did this as an undergraduate. It was a graduate level course. And it was the primary focus of it was the World Trade Organization rules on sanitary and phytosanitary barriers. It's a blast, right? And so I took it as a distance course, and I'm with all these people that are actually in their careers, and they get this stuff, and they're science people, and they love it. And I'm like, what am I doing here? It's hard. I don't like it. I'm not going to use it. And then 5 years later, I took a job where I worked in the wheat industry on sanitary and phytosanitary barriers. It was a tremendous class experience. It taught me, as Jorge said, you've got to learn how to learn while you're here at K-State, right? And take some of those courses that might not be the most applicable to you at that point in your life, but at the end of the day, the world has its ways, and I think everything circles back in the end. And so that was, in terms of a classroom experience, where a single advisor said, you know what, you can do better than this, and we're going to challenge you on that. And a professor put a lot of extra time into helping this young undergraduate that had no idea what he was doing be successful in that course. And so I had a tremendous opportunity to be successful in the classroom. As I think about extracurricular activities, and this is where I probably spent a little bit more of my time at K-State than some would call balanced, because that was what was fun, right? And that was where I built a network, and that was how I met friends. And that was the folks that I still hang out with today, right? Those are the college friends that you always talk about meeting and knowing for life. We do a College of Agriculture watermelon feed every year, right? It's like the first weekend. And they all tell you that it's required, or they give you a coupon or some means of enticing you to go to it. And I went to the College of Ag watermelon feed, and all the organizations have booths. And there's the Ag Econ Club and Ag Communicators of Tomorrow and Block and Bridle, which is the Animal Science Club. And then the assistant dean at the time that had done my prospective visit and that I'd only met a couple of times caught my arm and says, hey, you ought to think about applying for Ag Reps, which was our Ag Ambassadors program, or our pre-Ambassadors program. I said, I have no idea what that is, but I took the paper, turned in an application, got selected, and essentially that's the training program for ambassadors. And that is probably where I spent at least half of my extracurricular time. Indirectly, it's where I met the friend that introduced me to my wife. And so as we think about the impact that a single person can have, that's a powerful experience. And she didn't do it because it was her job, right? It was just because she cares about students. And I know you could look around this room and find a dozen other people that she's done that same thing for. And so Ag Ambassadors, it was my launching point within the College of Agriculture. And so I hope that you all have had an opportunity to find your launching point as well. And then so finally, for that work experience, right, that job, I had a couple of jobs at K-State. I worked at the Ashland Agronomy Farm, It turns out when you work on a seed farm or on a research operation, you actually have to fully clean a combine from start to finish, every single seed. And so this was my first semester. I spent day after day at the Ashland Agronomy Farm with a pocket knife, a screwdriver, and a 1/2-inch wrench, taking guards off of a combine, looking for every last soybean. There are thousands that are left over, right? These are machines that are made to harvest hundreds of acres in a day. We're doing 3-acre plots. The limit wasn't on what the machine could do, but the limit on how much we could get done in a day is how fast their student workers could clean a machine and get that turned back around. So that was a good experience. Taught me that probably wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. I worked at the K-State Radio Network. It was a great experience. I went back and did an interview with them this afternoon and talked about my time on campus. It's a lot of fun. Eric Atkinson didn't break out a bloopers reel that I feared that he had somewhere. That was, probably I got my love of public speaking from my mother and my days in 4-H. Do we have any other former 4-H members in the crowd? Quite a few. It's always good to see. I did a project talk, 8 minutes long as a 7-year-old kid on bird suet. But from an early age, an ability to talk was going to be forced in to all of the Henry kids. And I honed that at K-State. That was my opportunity at the K-State Radio Network. But the experience that probably really drove home my work experience more than anything else and that put me on a path for my eventual career wasn't one that I got paid for. And I can hear him laughing now. Dr. Flinchbaugh knows it's coming. So I was sitting outside of Waters 119. That was our Ag Ambassador's office, right? And so I told you I spent like half my time there. It actually was like half my time, not just half my organization time. I love that place. Hanging out, and Dr. Flinchbaugh comes around the corner and he's complaining that he doesn't yet have a graduate student to TA his ag policy class. We have anybody in the room that's taken ag policy before? Look at that. There's a great group of ag students here. So he has taught, for those of you that haven't, he has taught the same class for 46 years and still puts more than 100 students in that class year after year. It's a tremendous record. And so the opportunity to TA for him, what he really needs is somebody to erase the chalkboard. And more than that, he needs a target for someone he can throw a marker at when he needs an extra joke in class. I sat in a little wooden desk in the very front of the room because it really was. It was a completely full class. But I happened to be in the right place at the right time, and I had, again, folks in my life that were mentors that said, Dr. Flinchbaugh, you've always had graduate students. I think an undergraduate could probably be your marker target and could handle the grading of the papers and answering the occasional ag policy question. And so that was how I came to do it, not once, but twice, meaning that I really can say I had to take his class 3 times before I could graduate from K-State. But ag policy growing up wasn't a field that I knew existed, right? I knew that lobbyists existed in theory. I don't know that I ever met one. But it wasn't something that I'd ever considered an area that I wanted to work in. But sitting in that class, I had the opportunity while working and volunteering my time and helping other students to understand Dr. Flinchbaugh's jokes and the ag policy stuff. I found that I really enjoyed that, right? Ag policy is kind of a wonky world. It gives me the opportunity to blend my background and passion of growing up on a farm and working in agriculture and working for the hardworking men and women that produce America's food supply and do it better than anybody else in the world, while at the same time mixing in this batch of policy that gives you the opportunity to do analysis and to work to build coalitions. It's an absolutely fascinating job. I love it today. I would never have known that it existed if it wasn't for that ag policy class. And that's more than the class, the opportunity to TA it. So I think as I think back across those 3 things, finding success in the classroom, finding your place of success in organizations, and then finding a place to get that successful work experience in before you graduate, you don't want your first work experience to come after you graduate. That's a recipe for disaster. is for the students that are in the room, I think the question I have for you is have you done those three things yet? My guess is because you're sitting here at a lecture, hopefully you weren't required to come to, but maybe you were, you're still here, you're still attentive, that you've probably done those three things. Or maybe you've gotten through two of them. And so I hope that you'll take the opportunity to check the rest of those boxes, to finish off that and make it a full K-State career, to find a mentor and to find people that are invested in you. And because it looks like in this crowd there's a few that might not be current students, I think the challenge for you today is how can you continue to be part of that K-State family? Because I think that everyone here has the opportunity, has the resources, has the wisdom to potentially be a mentor for a young student, potentially be that person that grabs their arm at a career fair and says, hey, you should think about this, or hey, you need to meet this person, or have you ever considered X, Y, or Z? You can be that person for a student, and I think K-State does that better than any place I've ever seen, and that's why I'm so excited to be a part of K-State. So again, it's a tremendous honor to be here this week. I've loved going back to the classes, seeing the university, getting to know the SAB students. Thank you so much for having me. Enjoy the rest of the night.
All right, thank you again, Dalton. Since we do have a little bit of time left over, we can do questions. If anyone has any, feel free to raise your hand. It could be for either Dalton or Jorge, but we do have about 10 more minutes. So if you want to raise your hand, if you have a question, anyone? Yes, Dean Boggs.
I find it very interesting to know the kind of what you were telling us yesterday about what Representative Marshall, the committees he's shown most interest in, and his work with healthcare, those types of things.
Absolutely. If I talk long enough about this one, I don't have to take a vacation day today. So Congressman Marshall, I think, as probably quite a few of you know, has the tremendous privilege of representing Manhattan as part of the Big First. And so K-State, tremendous priority for him. He's a graduate himself. He went to medical school at that other university in Kansas that shall not be named. But I know we've had him back on campus since I took this job. I've actually made a trip with him to Manhattan and to campus every 2 weeks. So I think if that gives you some semblance of an idea of the priority that K-State in education puts or takes up in his time in Washington, D.C., I don't think you need to look much farther than that. Specifically from a legislative side, he has 3 committee assignments. The one that was probably most prominently featured for the last year was the Ag Committee. Ag Committee is clearly key to the Big First. Big First economy is 60% agriculture. And then I think if you started counting K-State and some of the research, it gets even higher than that. So within agriculture, we work particularly on commodities, exchanges, and credit. Commodity exchanges and credit, which is also has rural broadband, a couple of those. We work on livestock and foreign ag subcommittees, so USDA's foreign development programs and also market development programs. And finally, nutrition. I think he's uniquely positioned to work on nutrition as a medical doctor. And so I'm excited. Ag is kind of my focus, and so that's where I spend a lot of my time with him. In particular then, he has 2 other committees, Science, Space, and Technology, oversight of a tremendous swath of the federal government's research programs, which happens to be something that K-State as a research university does a lot of. And then the third one is Small Business Committee. The Small Business Committee is a lot of fun. It doesn't have necessarily a real formal set of jurisdiction, but because small businesses are such a large part of the economy, pretty much you can make just about anything fit under that header. And so lately, been doing a lot of healthcare hearings there, been doing a lot of tax reform hearings, and so all new topics to me, but things that I know the congressman's excited to work on. Jorge, I think you should come back down and take the questions here.
Any other questions?
To land your job, your current job?
So my current job with Congressman Marshall, I first met Dr. Marshall probably a year and a half, 2 years ago. So I was doing a big part of what I did for US Wheat was I traveled to grower meetings, so farmer meetings, and I'd go to my typical like winter meeting circuit was like Great Falls, Montana, and Minot, North Dakota, and Winnipeg. Not exactly tropical locations. We don't grow wheat in Florida, unfortunately. But one of those places that I went was Manhattan about 2 years ago, and I was talking about trade with Cuba, and in particular wheat trade. The congressman was campaigning and happened to be in the crowd. He caught up with me afterwards and had actually a really good set of questions, a better set of questions that for folks that haven't been to Cuba and haven't followed wheat trade typically wouldn't do. And so we struck up a conversation on that. After he was successfully elected, his staff reached out and said, you know what we need is an ag guy and somebody that really gets this stuff and somebody that has some outside work experience that they can bring back to the Hill. And so that's how I ended up there. Really just pretty darn nearly lucked into it, being in the right place at the right time and trying to do my job well. I know. So Jorge, well, you might as well just start walking this way now. We're going to get to do this like speaking thing together a couple of times. So you talked about, so right, you're kind of maybe not necessarily mid-career, but looking at the next step. And so it's the million-dollar question that as we saw seniors today and that everyone is asking them is, what are you going to do when you grow up? I think you've already grown up, but where are you headed next?
Thank you. Okay. So remember how I told you that after you finish graduate school, you have all the time in the whole world? And I went through some bad experiences in my life, but I also found the time to find someone really special in my life. So in Garden City, while I was founding Nerd Talk and talking to other schools, I also found someone that makes me feel really special, my fiance, and we're getting married over the summer in Manhattan, Kansas, in Aggieville. And can you wave to them just so they know who you are? She's also a K-State alumni. She graduated in education. So besides getting married, one thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna continue working on this job because I do love it. But to a certain extent, I'm planning to go to vet school. Did you know that, Brett? Okay, so I'm planning to go to vet school because I feel that if I get a vet degree, now that I have a master's, I have a lot of opportunities to either go to academia or also go for profit organizations that are also working in conservation. And I did say for profit organization because I'm gonna get married and I'm gonna need money, right? So that's what I'm planning to do. I'm planning to apply to Kansas State University. So if you know people in the vet school and you want to write me a letter of recommendation, deans, that would be really welcome. Brett, I'll be emailing you for that as well. And I'll send you a thank you card. And then after that, I don't know. I think that as a kid, I planned my life that I want one way, but I learned that sometimes life is not just like you plan it. Sometimes new opportunities, good things happen, and sometimes bad things happen. And what you need to do is just accommodate to those things and go where things go, and hopefully things go well. And for me, it has worked. Did that help? Anyone has more questions for him?
I got one for both of you. As young alumni, you continue to move on in your careers and move around the country. How do you want to stay connected to K-State and your K-State family? How can we help you stay connected?
You're going to answer too. Okay. So I want to have her job. I want to be part of K-State Alumni Board as well. I want to be able to take some of these students into Ohio State University once they graduate from K-State. And honestly, it wouldn't make me any happy if one day I come back to Kansas State University and work at the vet school and be able to teach, do research, and probably do clinicals. That would be a dream come true.
I think that's a pretty good one. So in my mind, as I think about connecting to campus, so I had that every student's dream, right? I lived in Manhattan after I graduated and could still go to, like Varney's and Aggieville. And so I did that for 5 years, and it was really easy to stay connected to campus. And so for me, as I think about how I want to connect with the K-State family and connect with campus and the university, when I'm now a 2.5-hour plane ride away, it's about connecting with local alumni. And then being able to bring the K-State folks through the office when we come into town, or when they come into town. And it's about how do we help structure watch parties so that we've got a place with a whole bunch of purple in it to watch K-State football games. And then who's our point of contact when we are back in Manhattan and we want to go for a tour of the vet school, right? Like this week we had Marcus set up everything. And so it's hoodoo, and everybody should give Marcus a round of applause. He's in the back with a great purple tie. I took a campus tour this week. I kind of used to give like half of those, but it was great to see the new buildings. And so I think, for alumni to come back, it's how do you connect them with the great things that are happening on campus today, even when we don't live here.
Dalton, I have a question for you. So I don't know if you work with this, but what kind of programs are you working for to help with the drought or help farmers?
Absolutely. That is exactly what I do. And so our big focus right now is on the 2018 Farm Bill. And as we think about drought mitigation, for a lot of us in agriculture, that's a safety net. So in the primary one, what we heard time and time again, I think we had 21 witnesses at the field hearing last week. That thing went for 3 hours. And what we heard time and time again was crop insurance and the need to continue that program. I think that we heard a lot about tweaks to other farm programs, but for the most part, not making big changes and kind of taking the medical doctor's mantra of do no harm to what we have today in terms of a federal safety net. That's a big piece of it. Specifically on drought projects, I'd be amiss if I didn't put a plug in for the research that K-State does in terms of water efficient crops and also making crops more water efficient or more heat tolerant. When I worked at the Kansas Wheat Innovation Center, right, we built 15,000 square feet of lab space. They are now doubling their greenhouses so that they can go through and screen wild wheat relatives and look for plants that do well in extreme temperatures. So that's, right, so today, how do we cope with disasters and droughts is policy. Tomorrow is how do we put the research in place so that a drought isn't as big of a deal tomorrow as it is today.
Okay, in your job, in your office, Dr. Marshall's office, are there any concerns about some of the potential changes in trade policy that may be occurring and how that
Love it. So pretty soon, I won't even have to, so trade policy, I think the way that trade policy was demonized in the last presidential election by both parties was just a travesty. And so I think, right, one thing we know, particularly for a state like Kansas, 98% of consumers live outside of our borders. And so we've got to find a way of getting our products to them. Now, does that mean that our past trade agreements were all perfect? No, probably a long ways from it. But at the same time, for an export-dependent industry like agriculture, right, we export 50% of the wheat that we produce, and we've got piles of it sitting outside of grain elevators all the way across the state. We've got to maintain a proactive trade agenda. So when I think about concerns of the current administration, and we were all really hopeful that TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, kind of our signature agreement with Southeast Asia and Latin American countries, would survive that transition. There was some precedent for that. Those have been Colombia, Peru, South Korea, were all renegotiated after a presidential transition and put back into effect. So my hope is that we can salvage the positives out of TPP. It probably doesn't go back forward as a multilateral 12-country agreement. We already have bilaterals with 6 of those countries, though. And so how do we get started on a bilateral with Japan and capture the gains that we would have seen through TPP? The U.S. meat and livestock industry, cattle industry, is losing $400,000 a day in sales to Australia because they have an agreement with Japan that we don't. And that's real money, and stuff that, money that we can't afford to be passing up in the current ag economy. But great question, great focus on trade. And now Sierra's nervous, we'll go even farther into the trade policy weeds.
All right, so as we start to wrap things up, if we could just thank and congratulate our 2017 Distinguished Young Alumni recipients one more time, Jorge Mendoza and Dalton Henry. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. We've had an amazing turnout. As you're on your way out, there is still cookies and other refreshments available. Feel free to grab as much as you would like and take it on the road. Have a great evening, and thank you again.